The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome to UNO. Consider this, there is a problem with violence in our schools today, but many people are in denial. We'll talk about that and see if that hypothesis holds true, or at least what our guests think. Catherine Pillar is with us today. She is a educational and mediation consultant, was principal in a number of schools, most recently vice principal at South High, and in 1995 left South High because of threats from students. And that's a long story, you may remember it. Also with us today is Craig Christensen. He's president of the Nebraska State Education Association, the organization which helps design policy for involving many of the teachers, most of the teachers in the state of Nebraska. And Kelly Asmussen is, Dr. Kelly Asmussen is an associate professor of criminal justice at Peru State College, and one of his specialties, if you will, is the issue of school violence, and I want to thank you for being here today. Let's just run through real quickly around robin of some of the things that you may know, facts that you may know, or statistics about violence in the schools. Catherine.
Well, one fact that's important, I think, to everyone is that 1 in 10 students stay home from school in our nation because they're afraid to go to school. And that's a critical issue when we're deciding what to do about school vouchers and public school systems, and I think it's an issue that we need to directly deal with in order to make schools better so everyone's feeling safe about going to school.
Craig?
Well, I think I would hope that the discussion would focus on a couple things. It's possible to have two truths. One is that schools are safe. The other truth is we have a rising problem with violence and a rising problem with incivility and with abuse and abusive language in general. We've got to admit that problem. We've got to do something about it.
Kelly.
I think that we do have a problem, that problem focuses a lot on denial. Not to say that we don't have safe schools, because we do have a majority of the schools that are safe. However, I think the largest problem that we're really facing right now is strictly dealing with denial that we want to, or that if we're not in denial, that we're wanting to really focus on it and deal with it in a preventative manner, and also to deal with it educationally so that it helps everyone.
Okay, let me tell you folks at home that in the time frame that this show is taped, right now there is a 14-year-old student at the time of this taping holed up in a school in Pocatello, Idaho. 5 other students and a principal are there ostensibly being held hostage. The student had 2 weapons when he entered the school, traded one for some cigarettes and alcohol, traded with police. And this is a school for troubled youth. I should make that point very clear. But this falls on the heels of numerous incidents and reports in the news and in the real lives of children and adults in the last few weeks, not the least of which is the situation in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I think, too, we need to define school violence. We're not talking about all these Associated Press reports in terms of, multiple guns being brought in, the Jonesboro thing, but we are talking about what? Let's put it in a real quick frame. Each of you give me an element of what you see as school violence.
Well, school violence is any verbal remarks that are threatening or intimidating or emotionally abusive to a person who works in the system or someone who goes to school, and physical action that threatens or harms another person. So it's not just actually hurting somebody physically, but also the verbal things that cause emotional distress and the fact that people are afraid to go to work and school.
From the teacher's point of view, how would they define school violence?
Well, I think that is the definition of violence. It runs the entire gamut from, as Catherine has said, from abusive language, from intimidating language, all the way to physical confrontation and, unfortunately, fatalities and lethal situations sometimes. For teachers in Nebraska especially, there is a understanding that times have changed. There is a rising amount of childhood violence, period, in the community. And I think it's important to understand that we can never take schools out of the context of that community. We have a violent society. We have a rising level of violence as we've defined it in schools among children. And for teachers, many of our teachers have been victims of that. Many of them, we don't know how many, because within the system sometimes they are afraid or discouraged from saying that they have been a victim of this. So we really don't know the extent, but we do know that there's a problem there.
Now, you're technically the academician, Kelly. I think in terms of your approach to this has been a little more academic than the other two. Not that theirs isn't just as valid from experience. When we say school violence, it's pretty much in an academic sense what Catherine said in terms of a definition, is it not?
I think so, but there's one other part of it that I think that I try to address when I teach my class on school violence, and that is the perception of safety of kids and teachers and administrators. That the perception is that kids want and need to feel safe in order to learn. And because of that, the violence might not be real. The violence might not be very serious, but the consequences of those actions are just as real, because the kids are not able to learn to the best of their ability, and they're afraid to learn because of what happens.
Okay, there are a few elements of this. That there's the intimidation that makes learning impossible, or the perception of intimidation. Right. And that also prevents teaching, too. Mm-hmm. And especially if the teacher is short-circuited from this process, then nobody learns. Mm-hmm. Not just the one who perceives the one or a few more that perceive the violent threat or intimidation. The other thing is that I think the general public, and you'll hear this on radio talk shows, and you'll see it in letters to the editor, and at least this is my opinion, that they feel that schools are not the haven for civility, let alone getting to the issue of violence. I mean, I don't think people have even gotten past the fact that schools have changed from when they grew up. But it goes back to maybe, Craig, what you're saying is that it can be no less or more than a mirror of society.
That's right, and when we look at what has happened in America in terms of overall juvenile crime or overall juvenile violence, kids, murdering kids, for instance, that level has increased dramatically in the last decade, about 144%.
So it's not just the little bullying and everything, which, as a parent of a child who was bullied, never underestimate the effect on everything of that. We're talking murder, assaults that do end in some physical harm.
As I've said, we cannot take the school out of the context of general society. Kids understand the kind of modeling, the kinds of sanctions that are out there, what parents tell them, what the media tells them, what video games tell them. When we look at the 16 industrialized nations in the world, and we realize that of every 4 children who are murdered in those nations, 3 of them are murdered here in the United States. It tells us that we have an outrageous problem that unfortunately we're not able to sustain any sense of outrage about. In 2 months, I wonder how many people are going to be talking about Jonesboro, Arkansas, and what in fact will actually have occurred or changed because of that.
But that's so far away.
Well, I think it's a very complicated issue. It's not just that it's mirroring society, but in Discover magazine in October of 1997, they talked about the root causes of violence in our society and in the schools. And one of the big issues is their schools' failure to teach students, and it's a vicious cycle because you're unable to teach if there's violence going on, but people who are not learning are being disruptive. So it's a vicious cycle that we need to take care of, and we need to make sure that our teachers are accountable to teach, and yet we need to make a safe environment for them to teach. So one is, it's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing. Which came first? Was it that the child is not successful at all in school, and so now they're acting out in violence, or is it a combination of all things? And I think one of the dangers that I've seen over the years is that quite often there's a lot of blaming going on by all parts of society, but the schools too, where it's the parents' fault, it's society's fault, and what we need to do in the schools is make sure that what we're doing is helping students be successful and also helping them be safe.
I very much agree with that, and I think one of the things that will help us deal with this issue much more proactively is to take the proactive stance and quit worrying about, we still have to focus on the end result in some of these examples of what's happening right now in Pocatello, but I would like to see us place the time and effort on the front end on prevention, like to see us develop so that kids, even if they bring some of that baggage with them to school from the home where they have some very serious issues to deal with, that teachers are willing to help, and I think many are, but they are under the gun to teach the English and the social studies and the math.
Okay, that brings me to an, because it was, I don't even know how long ago, was it about a year ago that you
Yes.
led a
year ago
whole
and 4 days.
Really?
Yes.
A seminar that so I helped facilitate a little, but you were the keynote, and it was with Omaha teachers and some Lincoln teachers, any of the teachers that wanted to come, and the NSCA put it on, I might add. And some of the teachers took a little bit of offense at that it's like, and I can, having a mother that was a teacher and an aunt, it's like, it's all we can do today to try to teach. And because the diversity, well, of these students is perhaps a little more than maybe it was in days gone by, partially because we're moving our students all around in one socioeconomic block. You know, all the carpenter's children aren't in one classroom, and the racial, that, you know, you're trying to meet all these different needs with all this different baggage and everything just to teach to their academic level or their academic strengths.
Exactly.
And then you say, and we have to make teachers conflict resolution masters and peacemakers, and
But if we don't, they can't teach. That's the bottom line, in my
don't they
estimation.
deserve some help?
I believe there is.
I believe that they deserve help, and I'm not sure that the help is really there. I think someone mentioned that sometimes the teachers aren't supported, so they're afraid to come forward, or a principal or assistant principal, like in my case, and they're afraid to come forward and tell the truth, because then they're going to be seen as not being able to do their job, or being a rebel, or ruining the image, or whatever the case may be. And what needs to happen is that we need to be able to support our teachers and our administrators so that they can deal with the problems in the school. And there are approaches that can be used, very systematic approaches that can be taught to teachers, and it's not being taught at the post-secondary level. When we go into education as an administrator or as a teacher, no one says, when you become an assistant principal or a principal, you're going to be having to check students for weapons. You're going to have to be a detective in the school, and you're going to have to investigate so that you can find out if there's drugs, so that you can find out if someone has a weapon on their body, or I mean, you are not told these kinds of things because the post-secondary schools are either not aware of that or not admitting those problems. I'm not sure why.
They don't teach kitty lit and then this.
No, they don't teach this. And so when you go out there, you think, oh my gosh, now how am I going to deal with this in my classroom? As an administrator, this is not what I thought I was going to be doing. I didn't think that, I thought I was going to be a curriculum leader. I thought that I was going to work with the quality of what's being taught. I thought I was going to be a mentor. And then the other issue, I think, is that many of us, I got an education about 17 years ago, and when I went into education, it was because I wanted to teach students, not because I wanted to teach a subject like math or social studies or whatever. I wanted to teach a student. And so what needs to come back for many teachers is the idea that I'm going to teach these students, and if the student comes in and they don't have the knowledge, and the way I'm addressing that student isn't getting that information across, then I need to come up with another way to get that information across. It really bothers me when I see letters to the public pulse from teachers, from educators, that says, if you give me a better student, I'll do a better job. The thing is, we're in the public school business because we are
the better student.
we're to be working with those students.
But let's get into the situation. I was at a party one night, and I don't you hate these stories. I was at a party one night. There were probably 30 adults there, 4 of whom were teachers. And they did not all know each other coming into the party. And they got to talking, and they started talking about the violence in their classroom, not just in the schools, in their classroom, in their schools, on school property. And they said, and we just really, we just can't really talk about it. We can't complain about it for some of the reasons. I said, well, you've got a teachers union. Why can't you, ask for, so.
Well, in fact, many of them come to us privately, but they are afraid. They're afraid of reaction from fellow teachers who believe that they are being disloyal to the esprit de corps of their school.
Oh, and there is that, isn't it?
There certainly is.
There is that.
There certainly is. I mean, we go out every Friday night and play the basketball game or the football game. We're all for the school. If someone tries to have a reasoned discussion about problems that are occurring in that school, they are considered disloyal to that school. So that's a very, very real problem. The other problem, of course, is that they may feel, and legitimately so, that they are not being supported by the Board of Education or by the administration in that school.
Or that their career track will be short-circuited.
Absolutely. Most teachers, for instance, in Nebraska do not really believe that if there is an act of physical violence in their classroom, that they are empowered to call 911 or to call outside intervention.
Well, the whole thing at South High School on when do we call the police?
Well, and that whole issue at South High School, and hopefully it's changed with the new superintendent. I hear that the policy has changed, whether or not the procedure, the reality has changed or not. But I was definitely written up for having called the police into the building, and there is no other school district that I've ever worked in where that was not the thing you did. If you have someone who's been injured or in danger or a crime has been committed, you call 911. And I was an OEA and NEA member when all of that happened, and it was very difficult, I think, for the association to support me in light of the criticism that they were given by the school district and by people who think that you shouldn't, step out and speak up, and so I think what you're saying is true. It's very difficult. And recently, last year, the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, did a survey, and they surveyed 1,300 principals, and they asked the principals about violence. And the results of this survey was that only 10% of the schools in the nation have a violence problem. Well, number one, I find this to be a faulty survey personally.
Because none of the principals will say.
Is a principal going to say, I can't manage my school? Are they going to say to their superintendent, gee, my school's out of control, or I'm having discipline problems, or I don't know what to do? On the other hand, some people think, and it was just reported on, I think Channel 7, I don't remember who was a reporter, that everything is being done in the Omaha schools to prevent anything like Jonesboro happening. Well, that's a pretty naive opinion, because first of all, I don't think that's true. And a lot of schools think that if they have a counselor, if they have conflict resolution going on, or some peer mediation going on, or anger support groups, that's going to solve the problem, and that is not going to solve the problem. That's not going to solve the problems of bullies, because you can't put bullies in a mediation group, because then they have a
They don't mediate well. It's not in a short term.
But the thing is, we haven't learned as educators the difference between bully violence and normal violence, the difference between out of control situations and how to prevent them. And there are ways that we can do that. I went to some in-depth training at the Johnson Institute in Minneapolis to learn violence intervention and prevention. It's not something I was taught in the post-secondary schools. It's not something I was taught as an administrator or a teacher.
I was going to ask you quickly, you were talking about they surveyed the principals, and of course it was not surprising that 10% said, only 10% said we have a problem. Do we need some sort of uniform reporting, because I was surfing the net, and there's a Safe Schools or Against School Violence or something website, and I noticed lots of states report it differently, if at all.
Very few do, and to me that's unfortunate. And one of my challenges that I threw out to OEA last year was to say, let's be very forthright in this. Let's look at what we have. We don't know what we have. We can only wait till we hear things, until those negative publicity things come up. and then we deal with them. I think one of the things that we need to do is to be proactive. We need to look at what's really happening and say, that's not a reflection of my weakness as a supervisor, as a principal or a superintendent. I think that shows the strength that they have to say, I think we need some help, but we don't know. Let's collect some data and let's see what it says. I've worked with a couple of principals who have done that, and you can see the world of difference when you walk into their schools, because the kids feel empowered, the teachers feel empowered, because they know they're all part of a team and the team is going to be educated.
And we're looking it straight in the face and, you know.
Saying, we don't know if we have a problem, but if we do, let's all deal with it together, and let's make a great basis to go forward knowing what we're trying to do.
And like Kelly said, the students are part of that. You must survey the students because the students know so much more than any of us know.
They always do.
There's no question they know about the weapons and drugs in the school that no one's going to tell us about, and they're being bullied, but they're not going to tell an adult because they'll get it worse if they tell an adult. So they know a lot more than we do.
That's right. That's right.
The other part of that I think that's really needs to be understood is that a violence curriculum is not a separate add-on curriculum to the schools. In the course that I teach, I have teachers come in and we spend a great deal of time, how can you integrate the theme of violence and violence prevention into math and science and English and health and physical education and social studies.
See, we had multiculturalism and now we have to have violence. And,
and I'm amazed
I think it's important, though, to emphasize that the kind of skills that we need to deal with this problem are not just teacher skills. These are learned skills that we also have to teach students.
Exactly.
And I agree absolutely that these can be incorporated very easily, but we need direction, we need leadership, we need teacher training, but we need to teach students the learned skills of how to deal with controversy, how to deal with confrontation, how to manage problems. I object a little bit to conflict resolution. Not every problem is going to be solved. Not every wound is going to go away. But we learn how to manage those and how to choose better alternatives. So when we talk about structured controversy, for instance, within a classroom, in which through debates or through other ways in which students really find out that there are two sides to most questions and that there's some accommodation and some compromise, all those kind of skills that we learn, those are student skills as well that have to be taught.
You know what that reminds me of is that, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but I have been to many DARE graduations, and that's the drug abuse resistance education, and I think all our fifth graders, at least in this area, go through it, and it's usually a police officer involved. And really the curriculum, it seems very sound, teaching kids how to deal with peer group pressure and everything. But it's so, it seems to me it's so separate from anything else. I think it's all sound information, but I mean that just sort of kind of rang a bell.
Use many of those same skills to incorporate it.
Not that the teachers don't use that same kind of thing.
However, I understand what you're saying, but what I think needs to happen beyond that is a prevention program that the whole school is involved with.
Has to be a system.
Right. In other
Everybody.
words, I'm just saying it can't be one component taught like,
No.
Right.
like
No.
you've got math and then you've got English or literature.
It has to
and
be
you
a
have
coordinated
no violence
systems-wide
class.
approach.
But I think what I'm saying though is a more specific plan for how you're going to deal with the lowest levels of violence. For instance, the Jonesboro situation. If you believe the media reports, there were warnings for 2 months before the shootings happened.
There was a warning in this one I told you about today. Threatened
Right.
the principal
Right.
last week.
But what happens so often is that, and no one's, I'm not blaming anybody in this situation, but if you had a prevention program where people clearly knew the definition of violence is a word or an action, that it can also be a word, then when those threats of violence were made, the students would have known this is something I need to report. And the teachers would have known, this is something I need to take seriously and there needs to be immediate consequences. I'm not saying that I know whether or not that would have prevented the massacre that happened, but it certainly would have addressed the problem 2 months earlier in that situation. And that's something that we don't do in our schools. We don't do a
systems-wide
systematic
approach would
Right.
help try to prevent some of those. We're not going to prevent all of them, but the systems-wide approach that everyone has the buy-in to the approach, and you have a safety plan. The safety plan goes from A to Z
Exactly.
to help everyone feel comfortable in dealing with it. You're not going to be 100% successful, but you're going to be much more ready to be able to prevent a lot of problems.
Let's say we were in one of those, and I hate those brainstorming sessions. You know,
yes.
how many times you've been in. But let's just say, because we have a very short time left, that we had to put together right now a priority list of things to do to put a system like you're talking about into place. What would be the first thing?
Well, I want to say something. Kelly and I are both on the state task force for safe schools, and this is exactly what we did. We've only met once, and I haven't heard from them for months, but we did exactly the same thing. And the first thing, I'll just throw mine out first. The number one priority that we said is that we need to collect the data, accurate data. Honest
Statewide.
data, statewide.
And are we going to have to mandate that, or it's not going to happen?
We might have to.
Some states are not doing it. I think North Carolina, which had a real violence problem, put together some sort of
It would kind of be
requirement.
a sense of relief to educators in some ways if they were mandated to do it. Well, I have to do it.
In a way, it sort of
You
takes
know?
the monkey off their back.
Right.
And there is a big problem out there. When we talk about identifying the scope of the problem, we're going to be surprised about the range of what we're talking about.
Oh, yes.
Oh, wait, are we just talking about a kid that accidentally, you know, we've all read the great OPS suspension, and it's not just OPS, but it comes to mind, suspension stories. The kid brought a fruit knife, and then is it just,
No, I think there's some very serious problems out there, and as Catherine has mentioned, it doesn't have to be physical confrontation. It can be dehumanization or depersonalization, where one child is constantly called a name and they become a thing or an object rather than another fellow student in this school community.
Okay, so first we
That's-
collect some data.
Right.
Then,
I
not jumping on
I'm-
you, Craig. Don't be mad.
One of the things that we really need is a pre-service post-secondary class and or classes that teach teachers how to deal with this. To my knowledge, myself and another faculty member at Chadron State are the only two in the state of Nebraska that have dealt with school violence particularly, but classroom management, classroom discipline, and what are the consequences of that. We're
What about
starting to do that.
how many hundreds of, probably thousands of teachers that already are teaching?
Well, 10% of our teachers are new teachers, so 90% of them need to be having
Re-educated.
training
And-
either through the association or with a joint effort between the schools and maybe
Okay,
it
we have
needs
less
to be
than a minute.
mandatory.
We need data, we need
Training.
education, training.
We need school-wide planning.
Every school is really a small village. In fact, many times they're larger than most small towns in Nebraska. It has to be system-wide. We have to adopt policies that address, as Kelly has said, a system-wide or a school-wide effort in this, because it can't just be one teacher or one cooperative work group in a class. It has to be a building-wide and I think community-wide effort.
Time goes really quickly. I just want to ask you one question, and I want a yes or no or jump in a lake or whatever. Do we need to have parents and interested people push for this?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Absolutely. We must have
You
that.
can't be fighting the good fight all the time.
We can take our schools back if we do it right now.
And we can
Right now.
empower students
All
and
right.
teachers how to
and
do that.
if you need these people's name, you want more information, you call me. I will get it to you. I want to thank Catherine and Craig and Kelly for being with us.
Thank you.
School violence, pay attention. Thanks for joining us.